Hello and welcome to Contemporary Philippine Arts from the Regions. I am Armin Rose and I will be your guide as we go through the contents of this course. This is Part 3, History of Philippine Arts. Philippine art developed in three major traditions. These are the ethnic tradition, the Spanish colonial tradition, and the American colonial tradition, leading to the contemporary tradition. These coincide with the major art eras of Ancient Era, Renaissance Era, and Modern Era, leading to Contemporary Era. The ethnic tradition is also known as pre-conquest, pre-colonial, or indigenous art. Ethnic art forms are primarily influenced by the geographical location and the experiences of the Filipinos. Pre-colonial art is woven into everyday life and integrated within rituals that marked significant moments in a community's life like planting and harvesting, rites of passage, funeral ceremonies, and weddings. Stories from the hunt imitated movements of animals and prey and the sounds they make. These evolved into the rituals, music, dance, theater, and literature of indigenous culture. Some of these rituals include the May Banu-Banua from Batanes, the Kanyao from the Cordilleras, the Kasyaying from Lanao, the worshipping of the Tagbanwa goddesses in Palawan. These are usually led by a mumbaki, or a shaman who performs the rituals. Indigenous instruments that were developed during these times were the kudyapi, the kulintang, the gansa, and the agong. In architecture, the early Filipinos used local materials like anahaw, bamboo, kogon, rattan, and other light materials accessible in the area. Here is an example of a house made from local materials and an indigenous weaving process. The alibata or baybayin is the indigenous alphabet, written in stone, wood, and animal hide through carving and vegetable ink to preserve the stories. Folk literature verbalized their experiences and sought explanations for natural events like the Kwentong Bayan and Alamat. Here is a picture of a pre-colonial sculpture and also the kulintang and the agong. Tribal presentations and rituals were the theatrical performances depicting their beliefs. They copied the movements of animals around them to create dances. The Pangalayin Sulu copies the motion of seabirds, the Kinabuha from Mandayas, the Banog-Banog from Higgaonon, and the Manmanok from the Bagobos copy the movements of predatory birds. The Talip from the Ifugao copies the movements of a wild fowl. The Inamong and the Kadaliwas copy the movements of monkeys, and the Tinikling from the Tagalog copy the movements of a crane. Okil is the Tagalog word for carve. Some of the famous sculptures in indigenous art are the Bulul from Cordilleras, which is the sculpture of a granary god, the Hagabi from the Ifugao, which are wooden bench status symbols, the Sarimanok from Mindanao, a mythical bird, the Naga depicts a serpent, the Paco Rabong depicts ferns, the Torongan are the carved beams on the Sultan's house, and the Sundok are the grave markers placed on the dead. Burnay is the Ilocano word for pottery. The Manunggol jar from Palawan is the most popular pottery from ancient time. It is a burial vessel whose lid depicts a boatman sailing the soul to the afterlife. The tapayan, banga, and palayok are used to store food and water. These can also be used for fermentation and cooking. Indigenous Filipinos also created jewelry and ornaments as a means to show status in the community. In Luzon, the preferred metal for jewelry is gold, and in Mindanao, it is brass or bronze. In the Visayas, the symbol of status are tattoos, and the people who wear these tattoos are called pintados. So the more tattoos you have on your body, the more important you are in society. Spanish tradition. The Spaniards introduced painting and sculpture, which mostly depicted religious subject matters. The music and literature were also reflective of the Catholic faith. There were secular dances performed in social functions like the valse, fandango, polka, and minuet, among others. This is a painting of the first Mass held in Cebu. In architecture, stones and bricks were used in constructing buildings like churches, houses, and government offices. Western Spanish influence was evident in architecture. The exterior and interior of the buildings were embellished with wood carvings or metalworks with intricate designs. This style is called Baroque. The Plaza Complex is the structure of Spanish-run communities. The plaza is a wide open space in the middle of the town, surrounded by the three most important buildings in the community: the municipal hall, the church, and the market. Surrounding the areas are the houses of the important Spanish people and local leaders, and in the outskirts are the rest of the people in the community. This is an example of a typical Spanish-era house. The Spaniards also introduced the Sarsuela, a lyric dramatic genre that alternates between spoken and sung scenes, incorporating operatic and popular song as well as dance. Other performances include the Passion and Pabasa, the depiction of the death and suffering of Jesus, sang in verse, and the Cenaculo and Panata, which are actual reenactments of the death of Jesus. These are usually done during the Holy Week. The Comedia de Santo is a play depicting the life of a saint, and the Moromoro is a play done in Mindanao. It is usually a love story between a Christian and a Muslim, wherein the Muslim character will give up his faith and enter Christianity in order to be with his love or her loved one and stop the fighting between their clans. This is a strategy of the Spaniards to promote Catholicism in Mindanao. This is an example of fashion that was popular during the Spanish period and a picture of a Sarsuela play. However, despite the strong influence of the Spaniards, the arts in the country did not result in a pure Western art, but a mix of Western and Indigenous art. Filipino artists still put Filipino touches on their art pieces. National hero Jose Rizal's novels are Noli Me Tangere and its sequel, El Filibusterismo. He started writing a third novel, Makamisa, to complete the trilogy, but it was left unfinished after his death. These are pictures of the covers of Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. In 1821, Damian Domingo founded Academia de Dibujo, the first art school in the Philippines. In the 1884 Madrid Expo, two Filipinos won the highest prizes for visual arts. Juan Luna won the gold medal for Spoliarium, and Felix Resurrección Hidalgo won the silver medal for Virgenes Christianes Expuestas al Populacio. These are the two paintings that won the top two prizes in the 1884 Madrid Expo. American tradition. Upon arriving in the Philippines, the Americans created the Sedition Law, which outlaws teaching and promoting independence to the populace. One-act plays in Filipino challenged this law, like Tanikalang Ginto in 1902 by Juan Abad, Hindi Ako Patay in 1903 by Juan Matapang Cruz, and Kahapon Ngayon at Bukas in 1903 by Aurelio Tolentino. The first Filipino play in English was A Modern Filipina in 1915 by Lino Castillejo and Jesus Araulio. In the American period, education was introduced to the Philippines. There were Filipinos who studied abroad and influenced art making in the country. Juan Arellano, Diosdado Lorenzo, and Victoria Edades were among those who studied and introduced the concept of modern art in the Philippines. Victoria Edades introduced modern visual art through his art exhibition, which shocked many Filipinos due to his different style in painting. Instead of using usual bright and happy colors, he used dull and dark hues in his works, with the life of the laborers, workers, and lower sector of the society as his subjects. If you'd recall from the previous videos, this depicts the naturalism style in modern art. This is the painting The Builders by Victoria Edades, created in 1928. Victoria Edades was named National Artist in 1976. He led a group called the 13 Moderns who engaged their classical compatriots in heated debate over the nature and function of art. The other 13 Moderns were Anita Magsaysayho, Carlos V. Francisco, Vicente Manansala, Hernando R. Ocampo, Cesar Legazpi, Demetrio Diego, Diosdado Lorenzo, Jose Pardo, Ricarte Puruganan, Galo B. Ocampo, Bonifacio Cristobal, and Arsenio Capili. The 13 Moderns were challenged by the older and more distinguished artists classically trained in Spain and led by Fernando Omarsolo, the first artist to receive the National Artist Award. Omarsolo created the iconic painting Ginebra San Miguel, and his favorite subjects are landscapes and the Dalagang Pilipina. Guillermo Tolentino is Omarsolo's counterpart in sculpture. He created the Oblation in UP and the Bonifacio Monument in Caloocan. This is Fernando Omarsolo and his famous painting, Ginebra San Miguel. During the Japanese occupation, art in the Philippines consisted mostly of propaganda materials from the Japanese Empire. The bond between Americans and Philippines still continues even after the Declaration of Independence in 1946, which is evident in the continuing flourishment of modernism. After World War II, artists started creating Proletariat Art, which depicts the life after the war, social issues, and economic problems. This is an example of Filipino art during the Japanese occupation. Contemporary tradition. Contemporary art refers to the recent and current practice of art ranging from the 1970s up to the present. It mirrors the society and culture of the present times. It uses a combination of different methods, materials, and ideas that transcend the traditional way of making art. This is an example of a contemporary artwork. Executive Order No. 30, signed in June 25, 1966, created the Cultural Center of the Philippines, the pet project of First Lady Imelda Marcos. It was inaugurated in 1969 during President Ferdinand Marcos's second term. They also created the Folk Art Theater, where the Miss Universe 1974 pageant was held, the Philippine International Convention Center, where the IMF World Bank Conference of 1976 was held, the Tanghalang Pilipino or Coconut Palace, where the Pope stayed during his papal visit in 1979, the Manila Film Center, where the Manila International Film Festival of 1982 was held, The National Artist Center, also known as the Makiling School for the Arts, was started in 1978, and they started the National Artist Award in 1972. All Philippine art forms and art practices in the country broadened. Artists experimented with different materials and methodologies and produced non-conventional artworks with a wide range of themes. This is another example of contemporary artwork. In poetry, different movements occurred. There were political influences in poetry, such as the works done by Amado Hernandez, Rolando Tino, and others that pertains to the political scenario. In the area of short story, writers such as N.V.M. Gonzalez, Nick Joaquin, Alejandro Rosas, and Francisco Brillantes wrote social consciousness and used vernacular language to attract more readers. Social protest fiction was introduced during the Marcos era. These are examples of books that were released during the 1970s, Dekada 70 by Luwalhati Bautista, and Luha ng Buwaya by Amado V. Hernandez. The Philippine music evolved during the 1960s. It became a combination of classical and traditional or ethnic music due to the introduction of radio, film, and other technology. Filipino pop music, or OPM, became popular because of singers like Freddy Aguilar, Heber Bartolome, and Florante de Leon. The songs tackle nationality and unity among Filipinos. These are examples of OPM artists in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Anti-museum art are composed of found objects and are presented in alternative venues. They usually have controversial and scandalous themes. This movement started in the 1970s. Social realism or protest art are conscious in their regard for the oppressed and underrepresented masses. The artists usually work collectively and in collaboration. This movement was popular in the 1980s. In the 1990s, support for art was almost non-existent, and the artists relied on festivals to promote their craft. Contemporary art is distinguishable from modern art in historical, stylistic, and cultural terms. The most common characteristic of contemporary art revolve around their being site-specific, process-based, collaborative, and interactive. I do not own the pictures seen in this video. Credit for these pictures belong to their owners. The ideas discussed in this video are based on the content standards of the Department of Education. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next lesson.